Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Are there really aliens among us? What do we mean by alien? If they're here, could we even understand their agenda?
Those are some wonderful questions from my co-host, partner in the paranormal, and Father Paul, and greetings.
Welcome to Behind the Paranormal, our 864th edition of the show, and today we bring you a guest who was with us only 2 months ago, and we didn't have a chance to finish our fascinating conversation, and now we have the chance to actually finish it.
Start to finish it.
Without a 6-month intermission. And so we welcome your calls today. The number is 401-766-1240. That is from anywhere. And you can email us at paul@behindtheparanormal.com. You can contact us via Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram for those who are not vocally inclined.
Coming to us via Skype today is Nadine Lalich, who began UFO studies in 2004 to investigate her own traumatic abduction experience that occurred on June 15, 1991. A retired paralegal, Nadine has also researched areas related to psychology and spiritual development. She is the author of Evolution, Coming to Terms with the ET Presence, and Alien Experiences, 25 Cases of Close Encounter Never Before Revealed, co-authored by psychotherapist Barbara Lamb. She has also written a children's book, Finding Happiness, a magical tale about the power of positive thinking. Nadine appeared in the New Paradigm Films documentary The Day Before Disclosure, Discovery Channel's Best Evidence, Alien Abduction, and Discovery Health Channel's Alternatives to Healing. She has been a guest on numerous radio shows, a featured speaker for MUFON chapters, the Los Angeles Paranormal Society, the UFOCon. Her articles appear regularly in the Journal of Abduction Research, and her website, alienexperiences.com.
So Nadine Lalich, welcome back to Beyond the Paranormal.
Hello there. How you doing, Paul and Ben?
Oh, just ducky, thank you.
Pretty fair, yeah.
So I guess we'll just kind of like hop right into it because, we don't like to beat around the bush. So are there really aliens among us, and have you seen any?
That's a loaded question.
Okay, you mentioned in the intro, what is an alien? How do we define that? And I think that's a very interesting place to start. Do I think that there are non-human entities present in our third dimension? I'm being very specific. Yes, I do. Do I think some of them may be off-planet, actually physical, originating off-planet? Yes, some. I also think that some of the aliens may actually be originating in other dimensions that cross over into ours, and that they contact us more in an astral way. So yes, physical, some, and otherwise other dimension, I would say.
What do we mean by astral?
Well, if I was to look at, I've had a lot of contact experiences in my lifetime, a large number. And when I look at these contact experiences and try to analyze them individually, what you find out is that you find a smaller portion of those really appear to have physical characteristics to them. Okay, in other words, you're in a location, there's physical remains or things are shifted in the physical realm, you have marks on your body, and there's a strong sense that it's actually occurring in the third dimension. Then a large portion of it can happen in altered states. They can happen in the middle of sleeping, where you're sleeping, almost as though you're having a dream that transfers into a lucid dream where appearances of non-human entities are there. There's other ones that appear to be in an astral state where you actually have a sensation that you are leaving your physical body and you can see your physical body being left behind, but your consciousness is traveling elsewhere in some type of astral state. So there's a variety of ways these occur. In my personal experience, I would say that perhaps a quarter or a third appear to be physical, and they seem to be physical entities. The remainder of them I really consider as being a possible something happening in another consciousness state, happening in another dimensional state.
Ben, why don't we move right to a listener question before we get any deeper into this than you can?
Sure.
Okay. We have, as last time you were on, Nadine, and just about every show, we have Peter from Bogota, Colombia, who is a very faithful listener and very good questioner, I think, sends in questions. So, Ben, why don't you pose, I guess there are 3 for Nadine?
He does it in 3s. He's when in doubt, be consistent, I suppose. So Peter's first question is, please ask Nadine to confirm she has seen the mantis type being, if that is correct. Is the anatomy and movement of this entity absolutely identical to the Earth insect, or different in some details? And do they use chairs of some sort of special design?
That intrigues me.
Yes. I only have one. Let me say, first of all, preface. My memories are primarily consciously recalled, and I mean a high percentage, 90-95%. When it comes to the mantis, I have very strong repeat conscious recollections of interacting with an actual physical mantis being, but only one. I only recall of ever seeing one. And it was involved in a training, testing type of environment, sitting at tables. Do they look like, I think there's a similarity, the way that their joints are, the way that they move. Now there's no, I don't know if they call it mandibles, I don't know if they call it an insect like mantis, but the mouth, there's no mouth movement, it's all telepathic. They're very tall. They're very, very skinny, segmented. And if you look at a praying mantis, you see how the forearms are. They stand on the 4 legs they stand on, and they raise themselves up with the forearms. The forearms are quite similar in what I've seen in this mantis, if that answers your question.
Can I give a little background here? Before, a lot of people might be listening and say, boy, they're really far out there this week. Well, the fact is that many physicists, including those who have been on our show and agree with us, some of whom have very big names, believe that in quantum mechanics you've got the idea of the multiverse and various versions of our own world, and many others. Just about anything that can happen that's possible will occur someplace, is occurring someplace or when or somewhere in the multiverse. So what Nadine is saying is entirely possible even from the viewpoint of physics and evolution. If we have an alternative world where insects were dominant, they could have developed such intelligence and even technology. It's entirely possible. They're very nimble creatures with limbs and that sort of thing. And if there's a language, that would be very easily done. People make fun of the idea of reptilian aliens, but it's entirely possible that in a parallel reality, dinosaurs might not have become extinct, and they might have developed intellectual capabilities beyond, and they're quite intelligent as it was, according to some scientists.
What was that short-lived show, Dinotopia?
Well, I think there was a miniseries.
It was a miniseries, whatever.
Yeah.
It kind of like that.
It's
entirely possible that exists.
So these things are way out there, but they're entirely possible from the multiverse point of view. Sorry to interrupt the questioning, but go ahead.
There's another thought in regard to that, though.
Sure.
You've also got to look at genetics. Because it's not just that we're having, you're talking about a multiverse where we're having an entirely different chain of evolutionary movement here, right? Mm-hmm. And where insects instead rise forward. Now, who's to say we're the normal one? Okay? Now, we very possibly have been, genetically altered early on in the evolution, because I know there's some missing links in why we genetically moved forward so dramatically at a certain space in our evolution. So who's to say that humans and even the humanoid style is the norm? So there could be, if you're looking at a different species, it could be and I like the idea of the multiverse in a way that you've got, it's evolving in a different way, in a different realm, and they cross over. But I mean, if you look at a reptilian, or you look at, say, we're going to talk about an insectoid such as the praying mantis, who's to say that they were not genetically engineered at some place in time? Mm-hmm. They may not have even evolved naturally. It may be a genetic experience, which they talk a lot about the Greys being biological entities that were genetically engineered.
Yeah, no, excellent points. Or biomechanical.
Exactly.
As some people suggest.
Right.
Well, I guess as you always say, Dad, it's kind of like, we always look for life as we know it. Rather, we should look for life as we don't know it.
Yeah.
Which is a rather poignant point.
Has to be considered.
And I guess kind of moving into that, we'll move into Peter's second question, which is, in your experience of being inside a craft, did that have any unusual effects on your wristwatch, phone, hair, or nail growth?
First of all, there's no wristwatch involved. If you're talking about hair and nail growth, could tell you honestly that I've not monitored that or paid any attention to that. Could it have affected me? Possibly. Would there be a radiation involved, some other type of energy that impacted on me physiologically? Possibly. In an event like that, I'm not somebody who wears a wristwatch, actually. But being on a craft, I mean, there's been the effect on the physical body, for example. The effects that I've had physically have been marks on my body, triangle puncture wounds, scoop marks, scars that have been there that disappeared. I mean, major scars that disappeared within 24 hours entirely. That kind of a physical experience.
That actually is a fascinating point. Last week for our open line show, we had a really interesting listener question, which talked about disease being kind of passed back and forth from whether ETs or interdimensional entities or whatever, kind of anything crossing through the membranes of the multiverse. Is it possible that diseases could be transferred? And I immediately thought of any sort of abduction experience, and I was like, I've never heard anybody talking about disease, but what I have heard about is radiation, whether it be radiation poisoning or cancers appearing, anything like that. Now, in your experience, what is your knowledge of this realm?
I have not personally had any. Now, what you'll hear a lot about in this field is you're going to hear a lot about healings. There are people that believe they have been contacted with very spiritual entities, advanced, and that they have experienced healings. That's not my experience. I have not had any type of medical healing to my knowledge. I have not had any kind of serious wounding or harm or disease that I know of in that experience. Now, I do believe that physical entities coming here are at risk, certainly, because they're going to be dealing with an environment that's not natural for them. And I do think I can recall instances where I believe there's been, limits placed on their ability to be here because of that. And I think a lot of stuff happens on the craft because it protects them, as opposed to being landed on the ground dealing with our bacteria and virus situation.
Well, we have a third question from Peter.
We do indeed. And the third question is, there seems to be a difference of opinion among top researchers on the effectiveness of invoking the name of Jesus Christ to stop abductions. According to Dr. David Jacobs, and I believe Daryl Sims as well, there is absolutely no effect. What have you experienced?
Mm-hmm. I do have an experience, actually. I had an experience where there are moments, as this continues throughout your life, I think you never get used to it. It's a little less terrifying over time. And I have a very specific experience that happened, and it appeared that I was on a physical craft, and I was being held in a waiting room with another man. And several ETs had come into the room, and they were going to take us somewhere. And I remember I had a moment of feeling just extremely terrified for some reason at that particular moment. And there is a lot of fear associated with this. This is not something that's easy in any stretch from your imagination to deal with. And I remember kind of dropping down to my knees and saying, oh, Jesus, and starting to say the Lord's Prayer. The response that I got, now again, you're dealing telepathically with these entities. You're not speaking. I was speaking when I was hollering that. The response that I had, and it was from a mantis, the mantis being, was that I saw a diagram in my head. I'm not sure whether or not I think I have a picture of that in the book. I'm not sure, the last book. Where they were trying to explain to me that we were all part of this one energy, this one life that we call God, and that God expands as we expand. So did it stop a connection? Not at all. No way. It didn't have any effect whatsoever. The only effect it had was a response in my mind from them trying to tell me how the nature of God really works.
Did you have any more information on that? I mean, did they explain anything about that? I mean,
they explained simply that as our consciousness expands individually, God's consciousness also goes outward and expands through us.
Interesting. Okay, there are some issues too about that don't seem to be addressed a lot by people who have experience in this field about the forms of ETs or alien beings, regardless of their origin, and how many species or races have been encountered. First of all, by you, and secondly, by people you've written about in your books.
Well. Some of the things that I put in, I refrained from including some of my experiences in the last book about my own personal experiences, but you might actually find these, with the subjects that you study, you might find these very interesting. There has been 9 or 10 different species that I've experienced. One of the most intriguing ones that would point to some type of interdimensional connection was I was getting ready to go to bed one night, standing upright, fully awake, brushing my teeth. My one dog sitting in the bed at the time, and I was brushing my teeth, and all of a sudden a big ball of light exploded outside of my window, and in a matter of 2 seconds it was in the room, and then instantly it turned into like a shaft of light going from through the ceiling to the floor, and it had little blue speckles of light in it, and something stepped out of the light. They were the most unusual looking beings I'd ever seen. I don't have this in the book because I don't know that this relates to aliens, in a typical sense of a gray or a tall white. This would be something different. They stepped out, and I kind of joked to myself, I call it a drive-by. It wasn't an abduction. It wasn't anything like that. But these light beams, there were 3 of them, stepped out of this beam, and I dove into bed, because I was fully awake when this started. I dove into bed, and strangely enough, my dog passed out cold. I dove into bed, and I pulled the covers over my head, which was a very strange reaction for somebody who wants to investigate. Very strange. But that was my reaction. And when I awoke again, and I went out, and when I awoke again, I had a full memory of what they had done, and so I was obviously conscious to some extent, even though I pulled the covers over my head. They pulled the covers away from me, and what they were curious about was the joints of my body, the way my wrists, my elbows, my knees moved. That's what they were curious about. It was a very short experience. And they disappeared. They went into the beam. It was gone. What the heck that was, I don't even know where to classify something like that, because it did not feel like they came from a physical realm. And indeed, I was fully awake when this thing began, which makes it even more interesting.
Yeah. What about the agenda or agendas that are involved here? Now, people talk about the alien agenda, but if there are many different species and races, whether they're coming from outer space or from other parallel worlds or both, how do we even begin to figure out these agendas? What if there are conflicting agendas or even warlike conflicts between these? I mean, history and culture is full of stories of wars of the gods from ancient times. What say you on all that? I mean, is there a consistency in these agendas or activities or not, do you think?
I think it's no different than what we have here on Earth. We've got all these different agendas amongst all these different races on the planet. I know, unfortunately. Yeah. But overall, what I really do believe is that I don't really get a sense of those that I've connected with and had these experiences with, I don't get a sense of them, anyone actively involved on the planet wanting to hurt us. I just don't have that feeling. I don't.
What about each other?
Now, the only thing I have to draw upon on that is that in one of my experiences, and this had to do, and I'm sure you've heard this from other guests before, we are shown things on what appears to be like a hologram. We're shown things of the destruction of the planet, things collapsing, things happening. In one of those experiences where I was in a room with people where we were being shown this thing, and again, let's point out the fact that, when I'm describing these kinds of things, if you're not familiar with this, it is going to sound way out. It's like anything. You have to be wary of condemnation prior to investigation. Mm. You must be willing to really research and investigate before you come to any concrete determination on whether this is way out or not. Things that I accept now and I look at as viable potentials 10 years ago I wouldn't even look at. So it takes time to really understand. Anyway, in this particular experience, they alluded to the fact that there was one other race that they were looking out for. When I'm referring to this experience, this had to do with tall whites, tall grays, and short grays that were involved in this particular experience. And they were suggesting that there was one other volatile race that would like to harm the planet, but they were interceding. They were looking out. Other than that, that's the only time I ever heard or saw anything that seemed to be, a potential threat to humanity. And I think as far as, I'm sure you're well aware to some extent of how they, we're having these UFOs are shutting down nuclear missiles. And they don't want us out there. They don't want us out there with our toys, our atomic toys. But other than that, I think it's more that they're curious about our evolution. Some are watching to make sure we don't step on their toes, because anything that has to do with nuclear devices is going to impact our solar system. But, again, only one other race, it was suggested, could possibly be a threat.
Interesting. We might know who they are. Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
So here's a question that I always hear so many different points of view on sort of what the alien agenda is. But one thing that just kind of popped in my head is, do we have an agenda for the aliens in a way? Which is to say, do we have a certain narrative that we want to make this fit? I feel as if over time, as sort of our perspectives have evolved and our perspectives have changed, it went from, they're just, Martians from outer space coming to take over the good old US of A to, maybe they're these, interdimensional healers or whatever blanket, positive benign statement you want to put on it, or it's like this crazy interdimensional conflict. But do we have a narrative that we're trying to make it fit?
Well, there's two sides to that. On one side, you're going to say that people are involved with it, people who've had contact experiences, researchers. That's one side of the game. Are we flexible as we evolve in our understanding of this phenomenon? Absolutely. But we're not the people in the power position. That's a whole other side. Who's got their finger on the red button? It's not the researchers and the people in the forefront of investigating this or experiencing this. The problem here is there an agenda? There's a political agenda. That's the problem. Well, we don't have a choice in that. And their agenda is, if it's not of us, they shoot it down. It's not like us. Anything is an imaginary threat.
Well, that raises the question that's existed forever in the UFO field, and that's why don't they land on the White House lawn? Why do they deal with people like ourselves and not with officials with their hands on the button?
Well, first of all, they don't need to do anything with us. They're so far advanced. Their technology is so far advanced. It'd be like talking to an ant, as far as technologically speaking. First of all, and they don't want to deal with it. Why should they deal with it, first of all? Now, you're talking about why didn't they land on the White House? Well, what was it, in 1952, whatever, they flew over the White House.
Yeah, right. That's right.
I mean, there's been plenty of times. There's been the thing that happened in the 40s, the L.A. Event, where they were flying and shooting at them over L.A. That was a huge event. So, and I'm not somebody who researches the actual physical trace evidence of these things, but there's plenty of powerful researchers out there. And according to my understanding from what I've read, there's been lots of landings and lots of trace evidence.
Okay.
So there you have it.
All right. Well, we're going to take our bottom of the hour break with that, and you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM in New England's gorgeous Blackstone River Valley. We'll be right back with our great guest, Nadine Lalich, so stick with us.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to the Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific Time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
And welcome back. It's WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM, and you're listening to Behind the Paranormal. Our guest today, Nadine Lalich. But before we get back to Nadine, let's take a call from our good friend Susan Spooler and get some updates on the Greater New England UFO Conference that's coming up next weekend. Hi, Susan.
Hey, Ben. It's Susan Spooler. How are you? Good to hear from you. And we're a week away from the Greater New England UFO Conference and Film Festival. But this year it's a film festival at the Wilton Town Hall Theater in Wilton, New Hampshire. Our website's newenglandufo.com. And we have Friday night, we have two Bigfoot movies, 2 UFO movies. On Saturday, we have 5 Bigfoot movies and 5 UFO movies. But Saturday is also a very special day because that's in the evening we honor you, Paul Eno, for your 50 years in the paranormal. And we're having a special gala dinner. And if people go to our website, they can acquire tickets to that and the event. On Sunday, we're having Bigfoot Sunday. There's 6 Bigfoot films. And then on Sunday, you're having your show, Paul, at noontime. And you'll be enveloped by 5 other UFO movies on that side of the theater. The theater is from the 1800s. There were vaudeville shows played there back years ago, and it's just quite an amazing place. It's also haunted.
Yeah, well, you couldn't ask for more, right? And it's unusual in these times to have an in-person event, but Susan always runs a very well-organized and tight ship, and there's going to be plenty of distancing, and all the proper precautions will be taken. So, and thank you for doing that, Susan. I'm excited.
Everyone to wear masks. Yep, everyone will be wearing masks, etc. Right. So we have a lot of surprises in store for everyone that shows up, and we hope to have a whole bunch of people come by and watch a lot of classic and cult UFO and Bigfoot films. A lot of them are pretty funny. Queen of Outer Space. We have Teenagers from Outer Space, Fire Maidens of Outer Space, black and white films from the 50s. We have ones that are more current. We're having Fire in the Sky and the UFO incident with Betty and Barney Hill. And the interesting thing on Saturday afternoon prior to your event, Paul, is Woman in the Moon. It's a 1929 black and white classic. And Jeff Rapsis will be playing the piano during that movie like they did back in the old days.
That just sounds great. Well, Susan, thanks for letting us know, and we'll see you on Friday.
Fantastic. Looking forward to seeing you guys. Thanks for taking the call.
Yep.
Okay, very good.
Bye-bye.
All right. NewEnglandUFO.com, everybody. Nadine, that sounds right up your street. Too bad you can't come up for that. All right.
Sounds great. I wish I could.
Okay, now we're in the second half hour here, and Nadine, very intriguingly, before we came on the air, was saying that she had some notes and some questions for us. So, Nadine, you're the host.
All right.
Trade spots very quickly.
Don't let it go to your head.
I won't. It was mentioned earlier that, did anything happen when the name of Jesus Christ was invoked, right? That was your question from someone there. And so this was kind of interesting now. I found the book, Beyond the Paranormal. You kindly sent me two of your books. And in there were some things I could draw some parallels to my own personal experiences. And which is interesting because it makes you wonder about, the multiverse, multidimensional aspect. And although when I said the prayers, I was describing an experience earlier when I said the prayers, I started to say the Lord's Prayer and I tried to invoke the name of Jesus Christ and there was no response. What is interesting is that there's been other occurrences where I have used the white light phenomenon, and that is where you visualize around yourself a vibrating, higher energy white light, and you invoke it as a sense of protection around yourself. Now, what I have noticed in several of my experiences is that really does seem to stop them dead in their tracks. It gets their attention. Does it stop an experience of contact? Not necessarily, but it definitely evokes a response in several of the species that I've encountered, whatever they be, okay? And I found that very interesting because in your book you were describing about seeing some success in dealing with entities, negative entities, allegedly not related to the ET phenomenon, where white light energy, where the person invoked the white light energy, affected them and allowed that negative energy to disperse more. The other thing that was interesting that you talked about in that book was you were talking about that one experience where the gal and her daughter were living above the store. I found that really interesting, and where they were having a tremendous amount of paranormal activity or poltergeist activity. And that finally at the very end, when you ended up, she had tried a number of things to try to counteract this energy from all the physical distress that it was creating. But then at the end, you had those sessions where, again, you invoked something very positive, which was you were reading positive things, you were talking about positive experiences, you were laughing, and things that you were doing that impacted and caused that energy to dissipate. I do believe that the experiences that I've had where I've tried that kind of thing have made a difference. For example, I've had an experience where, when these things happen to you, you can, over time, you begin to feel when a contact's going to take place. You can feel as though a craft's overhead. You begin to become very sensitive to the energy in the air, because that's another interesting parallel. There's an energy shift, almost like electricity. Sometimes my lights have gone off. Electricity has gone off in the area where I'm at. And so something is taking place on an energy level there prior to these contacts happening. Now, what I have been able to do on several occasions is to raise my own emotional state, which I believe we're all energy, as we know, and vibration. Raising that state has allowed me to avoid contact. As when you were talking about in that experience with the gal over the store, you brought a different energy into it. And that positive, powerful energy kept them at bay. And I see similarities there.
Very interesting. Yeah, that was, I always say that's the worst poltergeist I ever dealt with, and we got rid of it using a joke book, which is
right.
not the usual remedy I would suggest, but in the particular circumstances here, that certainly did the trick. But no, it's true. And it also brings up a point, Nadine, too, that you might want to comment on. That's that when we are experiencers of whether it be any of the poltergeists or alien abduction or any of these things we've mentioned, you participate in the experience. We don't just sort of lie there like logs and it just happens to us. We participate in it. We can affect it. We can, as you say, improve it. We can learn from it, or we can be hurt by it. But we participate in it. And our particular approach is that we're dealing with interworld in most cases anyway, or some interworld contacts here, and when this entity comes into our world, we are partially in its world, which is why we don't necessarily see it standing right in front of us. For example, in that Bridgeport house in 1974 that we're always talking about, you could see sort of translucent shapes, and you could feel the physical bodies, but they really weren't clearly in our world, and I think we were partially in theirs when these things were occurring. That's our thought on that anyway. So what?
As though it's an overlapping of something.
Exactly.
Where
yes.
These two worlds come together.
Overwash, as we had to actually invent a term to talk about this. So overwash is the term that we use.
Now, growing up, when I was growing up, and I don't know if I mentioned this in the last show, but we had an entity in the house, and it was non-threatening. I don't know if I brought this up before, but and I wonder if that'd be the same kind of experience. I would not relate to this as an ET at all, but it was present throughout my childhood. And years later, I got into metaphysics probably when I was in my early 30s, and that was when I started stepping out of the normal and starting to really look at the world differently. But and this particular, it felt. When you walk into a room and you know someone's watching you, looking at you, again, everything breaks down to energy in my mind. And so we pick up vibrations, we pick up shifts in energy, what's happening in the atmosphere around us, and you're in a room and you feel someone's watching you, feel very strong presence. Mm-hmm. And you turn and look, and there is this thing just hovering in the air. And as it's hovering in the air, it really is a misty type of a cloud that's hovering in the air, maybe 2 feet across, 3-4 feet tall, a couple of feet up off the ground, and it's just hovering there, slightly moving, hovering there, as though it's watching you. You turn and you look at it, you can see it clearly, and then it just moves, and it moves so fast, it's like it'd be like a cloud just dissipating, and it's gone. Mm-hmm. And we never had to, all my family had all seen it. We had seen it together, 2 of us at a time. We'd seen it independently, and it probably went on for about 10 years that it went on.
Linda Godfrey, who was rather incongruously commented on ball orb type phenomenon she had seen. Linda, as our listeners know, is an expert in on cryptids, and particularly dog-like cryptids in America, and has written a number of books on that. And she was investigating one of these in some place in the West. I'm not sure where, but she was in a basement, and it was a museum, a local museum, and the curator had said, come on down. Everybody, it's not everybody, but a lot of people see this orb-like figure, but they see it in different ways. Some people will see a person, other people will just see the orb, other people will see maybe an animal. And Linda saw the orb. So I found that was interesting, too, because people experience the same things in different ways, as you pointed out.
Well, Nadine. Like Mothman. Look at the Mothman.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of different aspects to that phenomenon.
Well, particularly we've been interested in the positive experiences. Not a lot of people had that.
I actually haven't heard of the positive ones.
Yeah, well one particular fellow... his name is Colvin. He's been on the show. Andrew Colvin been on the show a number of times. Said he and his family lived there, and were driving in a car and happened to run into Mothman one night on a dark road. And immediately he became good at math. He became an artist, and his personality transformed for the better. And he credited Mothman with that. And we've heard other stories of that kind, not from the horse's mouth as we have from Andrew, but very, very positive things that have happened that you don't really hear about. So, I mean, there were all sorts of aspects to these things.
Mm-hmm. And I gotta say, sorry to cut you off, Nadine. I've been sitting here contemplating and switching cameras. I realized you probably gave the most coherent definition of frequency that I've ever heard on this show, and I got to give you kudos for that.
Thank you.
Because I have asked the question so many times, and all the answers were just not satisfactory. Because you'll get to a point where it's like, oh well, yeah, it's just we're all energy, and then they just kind of stop, and that's it. But kind of moving it past it, because as much as it is much as we like to poo-poo empirical reasoning, unfortunately there is sort of that sensory aspect to the whole sort of phenomena. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's a kind of really good way of pointing out we do notice shifts in not just our environment, but in people's behaviors, whether it has something to do with brain waves, sort of like body language, maybe that gives off different sort of things, because sound waves in any sort of wave, really, it affects the surfaces that it touches, and it affects everything around it. And that makes a ton of sense, much more sense than, oh, well, it's just kind of a thing and you do it. And so I must thank you.
Yes.
Well, I've done, you know what brain entrainment is with sound and light, and I've been doing that for years and years, and I've gone through a couple of those computer units. And, in essence, what you can do with the brain is by neural beats, you end up encouraging a certain type of brainwave in order to produce the mental effect or emotional effect you're looking for. So indeed, sound, vibration, light can affect our consciousness in dramatic ways. And you're talking about how different people see different things according to the functioning of their brain. What are they taking in? If you look at a psychic or a medium, something has altered in them in order to allow them to take in the information that's around us all the time in sound, light, vibration, but they have the ability, because of shifts that have happened within their brain, that they're able to see things maybe we can't see, pick up information. So it's a very individual thing, I believe. As far as my contact with the ET phenomenon, what is really the thing that has happened, if you're talking positive, negative contact with entities, be it ET or any other paranormal, sometimes we get so, lost in the shock and the fear of it that we miss some of the good information that happens. With me, I do believe, and I've seen it demonstrated, I've had a marked improvement in my ability to pick up information around me telepathically and precognitive information. I've had some quite astounding precog dreams that have turned true within 24 to 48 hours. And those things didn't happen before. And I think there is a connection. Plus, when you are consciously, assertively addressing these, and I'm sure both of you have experienced it because you're stepping into these realms where you go, it's almost like exercise. You build up your ability. You begin to expand a little more, understand a little more, and then you can take in a little more. The brain is set up in such a way that it protects us. It tries to protect and keep us tied in so that we feel safe and secure. But those that venture outward, I think we begin to expand all of that. We begin to take more in. Now, you're going to see things in an environment of poltergeist activity that I may not see because I have not exercised my abilities in that area. So I think there is a lot of expansion that takes place in working in either of these areas.
Okay, well, as our time is disappearing here, unfortunately, Nadine, tell us about your website, your books, and the new book you're working on.
My website is alienexperiences.com and hbpublishing.net. Obviously, anything related to conspiracy and my lab and ET is at alienexperiences.com. I have the two books out. The new one is Evolution, Coming to Terms with the ET Presence, and Alien Experiences has been out for about 10 years. It was co-written with Barbara Lamb. The new one that I'm working on now is fairly unrelated, but it does involve more of a spiritual and paranormal slant. So it encompasses a lot of my other experiences in life that really did not seem connected to ET. But I think there's so much material and things that happens when if you live long enough and you're really paying attention, there's a tremendous amount of experiences that we have, and you have to really take the time to sort through them. So the new book is more leaning towards spiritual and paranormal. It doesn't necessarily have a title right now. I'm not sure where I'm going with it, but I expect it to be out in the spring.
Very good. No, that's certainly an interest of mine. So, in our last few minutes here, I wanted to bring up about the Men in Black phenomenon. Have you experienced it, and where do you think it fits in everything we've discussed?
Well, yes, I've had something what I believe may be the Men in Black, but not in the typical sense. You know, you always see the fedoras and the 1940 outfit when you hear the Men in Black described. In my experience, I had one experience that took place during a MUFON meeting when a speaker was taking place. It was Katai.
Lynn.
Lynn Katai was speaking, and it was a pretty freaky experience. And during that time, I observed these two characters all dressed in black, but they were hooded black, sunglasses, identical manner, very bizarre behavior, pasty white, faces and skin covered up. Never speaking, lurking in the shadows, sitting in the back row of the meeting that was quite full. Everybody in front of them rose in front of them. They fell asleep. I was sitting to the side of them and able to really watch their behavior for almost 2.5 hours. It was nothing normal about it. Yet no one would approach them or come to them. And when I attempted to leave the meeting, I took a photograph of them from behind. And when I tried to leave, they actually blocked the doorways, one on each side of the doors, and I had to go back into the meeting. It was a very, very creepy experience, very scary experience. It's in itself, it's quite a story. I know we have limited time.
Yeah. Do you think other people couldn't see them?
Oh, no, they saw them.
They did.
And the thing is, when you're having some of these, and maybe perhaps you've run into it, when you're having something out of the norm, sometimes, you're dealing with a subject out of the norm and you're having a group event, people come in and sometimes they want to disrupt it, especially in this day and age. And so you would certainly think that I drew it to the attention of 3 different people that were running that meeting, that there was something very strange going on with these 2 characters. They refused to go over and investigate, which made no sense to me at all because they were very odd and very strange. Wow. And in this day and age, you can't take those kind of risks.
No.
You go up and at least introduce yourself, tell them to take their hats and their glasses off, something, because you don't know what people are going to do anymore. They flat refused to address it.
Yeah.
You could see the fear. They were fearful too.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've been lucky over the years. I can't remember, maybe once a minor interruption at one small town library. But other than that, we've been lucky that way, I guess. So, disclosure, Nadine. What's your opinion on that? We think it's naive. What do you say?
We are disclosure. I don't think it's going to come from governments. There might be little tidbits released here and there. I think if we're looking for anything in a large way, in this country especially, I don't see it happening. I don't believe it's ever going to happen. It's not the way they operate. We're working. We've got a lot of black programs and a shadow government happening here. So I think that it's our individual voices. We are disclosure.
I like that. I've never heard anyone put it that way before.
A lot of firsts.
Yes, exactly. Well, the thing with government, having been in the military and seen some of it from a lower level, there are so many different agencies, all with their own agendas, all their own turf. Mm-hmm. You're not going to get in any way a unified, accurate, or even true narrative on whatever they may know.
We're even seeing that now with what's happening with the president. We're getting a little of this, a little of that. No one's coming clear with information.
Well, that's the thing. There's no common source of knowledge or information. So that's
I don't
just
ever
the way
see it happening.
It's been that way for a long time, and it's probably not going to change.
It's just we the people.
Yes. Yeah, that's what it should be, and hopefully it will be. But anyway,
if anything, it's probably just going to be a tool for propaganda, really, or misdirection.
Yes, the disclosure. The disclosure for anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about is the idea that the government will come clean on what it knows about UFOs and aliens. So that's what we're talking about. But in any case, Nadine, thank you for another great discussion, and we'll have you back on soon and keep us posted on the new book.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great. I appreciate it.
Okay, very good.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, let's take away our announcements there, Ben, if you...
please hold
Would
while
so
I
desire,
prepare
yeah.
myself for the announcements. And
All
the
right.
announcements start with the Greater New England UFO Conference Film Festival will take place at the Wilton Town Hall Theater next Friday, and Friday through Sunday. That's October 9th, 10th, and 11th. Because of COVID restrictions, this event will have a limited audience and will feature all kinds of Bigfoot and UFO films, old and new.
That's not because of the COVID restrictions.
Right. Well, it's that's a restriction. You can only play
Sentence
these
structure. Sentence structure.
You have a blacklist, and that's it. So there will be no speakers, no vendor tables. There will be a private dinner to honor my dad for his 50 years in the paranormal field and research.
It was like 100.
Well, hey, it's the mileage. Is that what it is? Mileage,
Yeah, it's not the years, it's the mileage.
There we go.
Yeah.
We will broadcast the show live from this venue, or from that venue, on Sunday with our special guest Nigel Watson, British UFO researcher.
And we do encourage people to send in questions for that, and we'll take questions from the audience, such as it may be, and excuse me, also emailed questions and that sort of thing. Excuse me. Bear in mind that Nigel Watson is a UFO historian, pretty much, and that in itself is a fascinating topic. And
when we had him on, that was great. That was really interesting stuff.
Well, we're doing a Nadine with him because we had him on and we just could not finish the discussion. It was just
too much,
not enough time. So we're going to do that with the audience in New Hampshire next week.
Radio.
So anyway, the following week. This is going to be the 17th and 18th. The Western Connecticut UFO Conference will take place via Zoom on Saturday and Sunday of, as I say, the 17th and 18th. This is a free annual event sponsored by the Danbury, Connecticut Public Library. Along with ourselves, speakers will include our own Shane Searway and Mark D'Antonio, along with Linda Zimmerman, Mike Panicello of Connecticut MUFON, and more. On Sunday, we will simulcast our show from here in the studio at WOON with special guest Dr. Bill Burns of the UFO Hunters TV series, New York Times best-selling author and publisher of UFO Magazine. Now, that's going to be an interesting technological feat, but I'm sure it'll be pulled off without too much difficulty. But again, get your questions in for that. And it's not often you get to talk to Bill Burns, so look for the information at the Danbury, Connecticut Library website, which I don't have here, but just do a search, and the information will be there, and you can register for the Zoom call. And they're looking forward to having people from all over the world. And I should point out that this was the last conference at which we saw the great Rosemary Ellen Guiley before she translated. Yes. And I remember last year we had an empty chair in her honor in the speakers panel. So a lot of love there. And she was a guest co-host of this show, too. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So additionally, we have word that the New England Parafest will take place on April 10th and 11th. That's 2021 in Kittery, Maine. That will be there will be a live broadcast of this show with the panel of the speakers on Sunday, the 11th, and more information will be forthcoming as the date approaches.
And COVID being COVID, we're hoping for the best with that as well. It's all the way out in April, but that's approaching rapidly. Yeah. Check out our books. Nadine was referring to Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong, book Ben and I wrote together, published 2016. Those are all available on Amazon and also BehindTheParanormal.com, our show website, and you can access there. If you buy them from that site, we'll autograph them for you if that's of any value to you, and there's no extra charge or anything. But we'll be happy to do that. And again, you can find out more about the show at that site, our many cases over the years, our public appearances, such as they are this year, and how to book us, along with some of our at this point, 900 recorded shows from our 12-plus years on the air, including our 4.5-year run on CBS Radio, along with special shows and podcasts.
And all our past shows back to late 2009 are available on major podcast platforms. That includes YouTube, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, the Paranormal Radio app, Spotify, and all sorts of lovely places like that. If you have the ability to give us a rating of some sort, that would be lovely. That way we can kind of, know that we're getting a positive response and whatnot. And even if it's not a positive response, we'll do the best we can.
That's how we learn. That's how we learn.
Indeed. So soon we plan to have all of the shows back to 2008 uploaded to all of those platforms.
Well, what's funny is the most popular show of all time on any of these was one we ran in 2013 on zombies. Of all these 900 shows, that's the most popular one. It's funny.
That was interesting. It was more like the psychology of why people wanted a zombie apocalypse.
Exactly. Not exactly talking about them existing. Although I talked about my experiences in Haiti.
I hope it wasn't a letdown.
No, it wasn't. Where a voodoo priest explained to me how it was done. Anyway, there are links to several charities we've adopted on the show. We encourage you to please help USA Cares, Canadian Veterans Advocacy, Helping Haiti's Orphans, Youth Mentoring Connection in Los Angeles, and several others whose organizers we know, Sisterhood of Ground Zero, and these are people we know, and things are as they should be, and the money goes where it's supposed to be. So, all right, Ben, what do we have coming up for next week?
So, next week, that would be October 11th. She's already plowing through October. We'll broadcast from the Greater New England UFO Conference and Film Festival with a live audience and special guest Nigel Watson, British UFO author and historian.
I'll point out once more, the website there is newenglandufo.com, and of course, if you're listening to the recording of the show, the marvelous organizer of that, Susan Spooler, called in at our bottom of the hour break, and you can just you can go back and listen to that because she had all the information.
Indeed.
Bigfoot and UFO Film Festival. So we leave you today with a quote from the 13th century Persian philosopher and theologian Rumi: "Don't grieve. Anything you lose comes round in another form." I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno, and thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey. We shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.